Hello everyone, and welcome to Smooth English. Today, I have a very special story to share, a story about strength, courage, and transformation. It's the journey of a young woman who faced deep pain, but found the power within herself to rise, overcome challenges, and create a life she could be proud of. Sit back, relax, and let her story inspire you. Chapter 1. The Darkness. The night was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of rain tapping against the window. Grace Miller sat on the old couch, knees pulled to her chest, watching the clock on the wall. It was almost midnight, and her mother still wasn't home. Again. She was 16, but life had forced her to grow up early. The bills on the kitchen table were stacked like mountains, and every corner of their small apartment carried a kind of sadness that even sunlight couldn't erase. Her father had left when she was 10. He didn't leave a note, just silence, a silence that stretched for years. Grace still remembered that day vividly. She had come home from school carrying a drawing she made for him, a picture of the three of them smiling under a big blue sky. But when she opened the door, the sky fell. His clothes were gone, his shoes missing from the door, his smell fading from the air. Her mother had cried for days. Grace had tried to be strong, to hold her hand, but she was just a child. Over time, her mother stopped crying and started drinking. That night, the rain grew heavier. When the front door finally opened, her mother stumbled in, eyes glassy and tired. "Mom," Grace whispered, standing up. "Hey, sweetheart," her mother said, forcing a smile. "You're still awake?" "I was just worried." Her mother sighed and sat down, her body trembling slightly. "Don't worry about me, baby. I'm fine." But Grace knew she wasn't. The smell of cheap wine filled the room. Grace picked up the blanket and covered her mother gently. That was their life, quiet suffering, nights of worry, mornings of pretending everything was normal. At school, Grace was the kind of girl people didn't notice. She wasn't the prettiest, or the loudest, or the most confident. She walked through the halls with her books pressed tightly against her chest, hoping no one would see the pain in her eyes. Her teachers called her a good student, but no one knew she often studied by candlelight when the power was cut off. One afternoon, while sitting alone in the cafeteria, she overheard two girls talking about her. "Doesn't she wear the same jacket every day?" one said. "Yeah, I think so. Kinda sad." They laughed softly. Grace stared at her food, pretending not to hear, but their words stayed like splinters in her heart. She didn't hate them, she just hated how powerless she felt. At night, when the world went quiet, Grace would look out her bedroom window. The city lights in the distance looked like stars she could never reach. She used to dream of being a designer, creating beautiful things, making the world brighter. But that dream felt so far away now. "I'm not meant for more," she whispered to herself one night. "I'm just me." Tears ran down her cheeks silently. She didn't want to wake her mother. She didn't want anyone to see how broken she felt inside. The next morning, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, staring at an envelope. "What is it?" Grace asked. Her mother hesitated. "It's from the landlord." Grace took the paper and read, "Final notice, rent due in 7 days." Her stomach tightened. "How much?" $800. Grace looked down. She knew her mother didn't have that kind of money. Neither did she. "I'll find a job," Grace said. Her mother shook her head. "You're in school. I can do both." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "You shouldn't have to." But Grace already knew she had to. She started working at a small diner 2 blocks away. The owner, Mrs. Jenkins, was a kind woman in her 50s who gave her a chance when no one else would. "You're a hard worker," Mrs. Jenkins said one evening as Grace wiped down the tables. "Don't let life make you hard, too." Grace smiled weakly. "I'll try." She worked after school, sometimes until midnight. Her hands smelled like coffee and cleaning supplies. Her feet hurt every night. But when she got her first paycheck, $220, she cried. Not because it was much, but because it was hers. One Saturday morning, while getting ready for work, she found her mother lying on the kitchen floor. "Mom, Mom, wake up," she screamed. Her mother's eyes fluttered open weakly. I'm fine, honey, just dizzy. Grace called an ambulance. At the hospital, they said her mother was malnourished and exhausted. She needs rest and proper care, the nurse said. Grace nodded, tears in her eyes. I'll take care of her. But inside, she wondered how she could take care of someone when she barely had the strength to care for herself. Days passed. Grace went to school in the morning, to the diner in the evening, and to the hospital at night. She was running on empty. One night, while sitting beside her mother's hospital bed, she whispered, "I'm so tired, Mom. I don't know how much longer I can do this." Her mother opened her eyes slowly. "You're stronger than you think, Grace. But what if I fail?" "Then you try again," her mother said softly. That's what strength really means. Grace didn't know it yet, but those words would stay with her for years. A few weeks later, her mother came home. Things got a little better. Grace was exhausted, but she kept going. Until one day, her teacher handed back her exam paper. A big red F covered the top of the page. Her chest tightened. "Grace," the teacher said gently, "you're a smart girl. But something's wrong. You've missed assignments, and your grades are dropping." Grace nodded silently. She wanted to explain, to say she was working, that she was barely sleeping, that her mother was sick, but the words wouldn't come. After class, she walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and cried. She stared at her reflection, tired eyes, messy hair, dark circles, and whispered, "I can't do this anymore." The weight of everything, her family, her job, her dreams, crashed down on her. That was the night she almost gave up. But deep inside, a small voice whispered something else. Not yet. Grace didn't know what would happen next, but somewhere in her heart, a tiny spark still burned, a hope she couldn't explain. The pain was heavy, but it was also shaping her. She just didn't know that yet. Chapter 2. The Struggle. The weeks that followed felt endless. Grace moved through her days like a ghost there, but not really living. She would wake up at 6 a.m., pack her books into her faded backpack, and walk to school with the same worn sneakers she'd owned for years. Her mother would sit by the window, weak but smiling, trying to act stronger than she was. "Don't worry about me," her mother always said. "Focus on your studies." But how could she focus when her stomach was empty, when bills piled up, when she could barely keep her eyes open in class? At the diner, the noise never stopped, clinking dishes, orders shouted across the kitchen, customers tapping fingers impatiently on tables. "Table 5 wants more coffee." Mrs. Jenkins would call. "I'm on it," Grace replied, forcing a smile. Her feet ached, but she kept moving. She couldn't afford to slow down. Every tip mattered. Sometimes, when the diner was quiet at night, she would rest her head on the counter and dream. She'd imagine herself in a bright office, designing logos for companies, creating beautiful things that inspired people. But then the bell above the door would ring, and the dream would vanish. At school, things weren't any easier. Her classmates talked about college applications and summer vacations. Grace didn't even know if she'd finish high school. One afternoon, during lunch, a boy named Daniel, one of the top students, sat next to her. "Hey," he said casually. "You okay? You've been quiet lately." Grace hesitated. "Just tired." "Same," he chuckled. "Senior year's brutal." But she didn't reply. What could she say? His tired wasn't the same as hers. He was tired from studying. She was tired from surviving. Daniel noticed her silence. "If you ever need help with homework or anything, I can." "I'm fine," she interrupted quickly. "Thanks, though." He nodded and left. Grace felt bad, but she didn't want pity. She wanted peace. One evening, after a long shift, she returned home to find her mother sitting quietly at the table, staring at an old photo, one of the 3 of them when Grace was a child. "Do you ever think about him?" Grace asked softly. Her mother didn't look up. "Every day. But thinking doesn't change anything." Grace nodded. "Do you hate him?" Her mother took a deep breath. "No. Hating someone just keeps you tied to the pain. I just let go." Grace didn't understand that yet, but she would one day. The next week, her teacher called her after class. "Grace, can we talk?" She stood by the desk, nervous. I've noticed your grades dropping, the teacher said gently. You're capable, but something's wrong. Are you struggling at home? Grace looked down. It's just a lot right now. The teacher handed her a flyer. There's a tutoring program on Saturdays. It's free. It could help you catch up. Grace took the paper, nodding. Thank you. That night, she sat on her bed, staring at it. Saturday. That was her only free day, the only time she could rest, do laundry, or help her mother. She sighed, folded the flyer, and tucked it into her notebook. Maybe next time, she whispered. A few days later, she got her paycheck, smaller than usual. Tips had been slow. Grace counted the bills carefully, then opened the rent envelope. She was still short by $150. Her heart sank. She sat on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Why does everything have to be so hard? No one answered. The silence pressed down on her chest. That night, she decided to take an extra shift at the diner. Mrs. Jenkins hesitated. Grace, you already work too much. I need the hours, Grace insisted. All right, Mrs. Jenkins said softly. But don't lose yourself in the process. Grace forced a smile. I won't. But she already was. The next few weeks were a blur of exhaustion. She started skipping breakfast to save money. Her hands shook during class. She couldn't focus on her notes. The words swam across the page like shadows. During one exam, her vision blurred and her head dropped onto the desk. Grace, her teacher shouted. When she woke up, she was in the nurse's office. You fainted, the nurse said. You need to rest and eat properly. Grace forced a weak laugh. I'll try. But she knew rest wasn't an option. That evening, she returned to the diner anyway. Mrs. Jenkins looked at her with concern. Grace, go home, she said firmly. I can't, Grace replied. I need the money. Mrs. Jenkins sighed. You remind me of myself when I was young, always trying to carry the world alone. Grace didn't respond. She just tied her apron tighter and kept working. One rainy night, after closing, she stayed behind to clean. The neon lights outside flickered through the window, painting her face in soft pink and blue. She wiped a table and whispered, I can't keep doing this. Her voice cracked. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She sank into a chair and buried her face in her hands. What am I even fighting for? She asked the empty room. The answer didn't come right away, but it would. A few days later, she found a small envelope in her locker at school. Inside was a note. You're stronger than you think. Don't give up. No name. No clue who wrote it. She looked around, confused. But for some reason, that simple message made her heart ache in a good way. She folded the note carefully and kept it in her wallet. Every time she felt like quitting, she would take it out and read it again. But life wasn't done testing her yet. 2 weeks later, her mother's health declined again. She had to be readmitted to the hospital. The bills were crushing. Grace sat in the hospital hallway, her hands trembling around the medical forms. A nurse approached. Are you her daughter? Yes. We'll need a small deposit for her medication. How much? $200. Grace froze. I don't have that. The nurse gave her a sympathetic look. I'm sorry. Maybe you can talk to the social worker tomorrow. Grace nodded weakly. When the nurse left, she sat on the cold floor, tears streaming down her face. I'm doing everything I can, she whispered to herself. Why isn't it enough? That night, she went home and collapsed on her bed, still in her diner uniform. The smell of grease clung to her clothes. Her whole body ached. She wanted to scream, to break something, to run away, but all she could do was cry quietly into her pillow. Her mind replayed every failure, every moment she'd fallen short. The exam she'd failed. The rent she couldn't pay. Her mother's sickness. She whispered, maybe I'm not meant for more. And for the first time, she almost believed it. But life has a strange way of bringing light when we least expect it. The next morning, Grace was walking to work when she passed a small bookstore she had never noticed before. The sign said, used books, $1 each. Something made her stop. She walked inside. The smell of old paper filled the air. An elderly man behind the counter smiled. Looking for something special? Grace shook her head. Just looking. Her fingers brushed across the spines of hundreds of books, stories about people who had suffered, fallen, and risen again. One title caught her eye, You Can Heal Your Life. She opened it and read the first line. You have the power to change your story. Something inside her shifted. She bought the book with the last dollar in her pocket. That night, she sat by her window and read until the sun came up. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope, small but real. She began underlining sentences that spoke to her. Pain is a teacher. You are not your past. The moment you decide to change, you already have. Each word felt like medicine to her soul. Grace didn't suddenly become strong overnight, but something inside her began to awaken, a quiet determination that whispered, You can do this. She started journaling, writing her thoughts, her fears, her dreams. At first, it felt strange, but soon it became her escape. She wrote, I'm tired, but I'm still here. Maybe that means something. Every night, she wrote one sentence that ended with hope. And slowly, without realizing it, she was beginning to heal. Chapter 3. The Awakening. The first thing Grace learned from that small book was this. Nothing changes until you do. The words followed her everywhere, to school, to work, even in her dreams. She didn't fully understand them yet, but she felt something inside her start to shift. For years, she had believed that life just happened to her, that pain was something she had to survive, not something she could learn from. But now she began to wonder, what if I could use my pain as fuel? The next morning, she opened her old notebook, the same one filled with half-finished homework and grocery lists, and tore out every page. Then, on the first clean page, she wrote in big letters, My new beginning. Underneath, she listed 3 promises to herself. I will not let pain control me. I will learn something new every day. I will believe that my life can change. She didn't know how she would do it, but she decided she would try even if it was one small step at a time. At school, her teachers began to notice a quiet change. Grace was still tired, still struggling, but now she asked questions, stayed after class, and took notes with a new focus. Her literature teacher, Mrs. Clark, smiled one afternoon and said, You seem different lately, Grace. Grace hesitated, then said softly, I'm trying to be. Mrs. Clark nodded. Good. Keep trying. The world needs more people who don't give up. Those words warmed her heart like sunlight after a long storm. At the diner, Mrs. Jenkins noticed it too. You've got that fire in your eyes again, she said one evening. Haven't seen it in a while. Grace smiled. Maybe I just got tired of being tired. Mrs. Jenkins laughed. That's the spirit. One night, after closing the diner, Grace stayed behind to clean as usual. The sound of the mop on the floor was rhythmic, almost calming. When she finished, she sat by the window, opened her notebook, and began writing ideas. She didn't know why, but she wanted to create. She wrote things like, Learn graphic design. Start a small business. Help mom get better. She didn't know where to begin, but writing it made it feel real. The next day, while browsing on her phone, she came across a video titled, How to Learn Graphic Design for Free. She clicked it. The man in the video said, All you need is a computer, internet access, and the desire to learn. Grace smiled. Well, I have at least one of those. She didn't own a laptop, but the public library had computers. So after school, she started going there every afternoon. She watched tutorials, practiced with free design tools, and took notes like her life depended on it. At first, she didn't understand anything. The software seemed complicated, the lessons too fast. But she refused to give up. Every mistake became a lesson. Every failure, a step forward. One day, the librarian, a kind woman named Rebecca, approached her. You've been coming here every day for weeks, she said, smiling. One day, the librarian, a kind woman named Rebecca, approached her. Working on something special? Grace hesitated. Just trying to learn design. Rebecca nodded approvingly. That's wonderful. Most people give up after one try. Grace smiled shyly. I guess I've already had enough practice not giving up. The librarian chuckled and pointed to a shelf nearby. There are some old design books you can borrow. They might help. Grace's eyes lit up. Thank you. That evening, she walked home with 3 heavy books in her arms and a heart full of quiet excitement. Her mother noticed too. You seem happier lately, she said one night from the couch. Grace looked up from her notebook. I think I am. That's good, her mother whispered. You deserve to be. Grace smiled. So do you. They both knew things weren't perfect, the rent was still tight, her mother's health still fragile, but for the first time, there was light in the house again. A few weeks later, Grace decided to test her new skills. She created a simple logo for the diner, a steaming coffee cup with the words, Jenkins Place, where comfort lives. She showed it to Mrs. Jenkins nervously. Mrs. Jenkins looked at the paper, then back at Grace. You made this? Grace nodded. I'm still learning, but... It's beautiful, Mrs. Jenkins interrupted. We're putting it on the menu. Grace's heart nearly burst. Really? Really, Mrs. Jenkins said, smiling proudly. And when you start your design business one day, I'll be your first customer. For the first time, Grace felt something powerful, confidence. But not everyone believed in her. One evening, as she was leaving school, she overheard 2 classmates talking. Grace Miller's learning graphic design now. One laughed. She can't even afford a laptop. The other smirked. People like her don't make it far. Grace froze. The words hit her like a slap. She wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, but instead, she walked away in silence. That night, she cried quietly on her bed. But when she opened her notebook, she wrote, They're right, people like me don't make it far. Unless we decide to. She underlined those last 4 words 3 times. Her determination grew stronger. Every afternoon, she went to the library. Every night, she practiced. Slowly, her designs improved. She started posting them online, small pieces of art with messages like, You're stronger than you think, and pain builds power. To her surprise, people began to notice. A stranger commented, This is beautiful. You have talent. Another wrote, Your designs made my day. Grace smiled. She hadn't just found a skill, she had found a voice. One afternoon, Rebecca, the librarian, waved her over. Someone left this flyer for you, she said. It was for a local youth art contest. The prize, a $500 scholarship for design school. Grace hesitated. I'm not good enough for that. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. How do you know? You haven't even tried. That night, Grace stayed up past midnight, creating her entry, a poster with the quote, Turn your pain into power. She used soft colors, blue for sadness, gold for hope. The next morning, she submitted it. Then she waited. Days passed. Then weeks. Finally, one Friday afternoon, she got an email. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Congratulations, Grace Miller. You've been selected as the winner of the 2024 Youth Art Contest. Her heart stopped. She reread it 3 times, tears filling her eyes. She ran to her mother's room. Mom, I won. Her mother sat up, confused. Won what? The art contest. I got the scholarship. Her mother's face lit up with pure joy. Oh, Grace. I'm so proud of you. Grace hugged her tightly, crying into her shoulder. For years, she had felt invisible, but at that moment, she knew. She mattered. That night, she wrote in her notebook, Maybe pain is not here to destroy us. Maybe it's here to show us what we're capable of. She closed the book and looked out her window. The same city lights that once felt unreachable now seemed closer, almost within her grasp. She whispered, I'm not done yet. From that day on, everything changed. She started saving part of her scholarship money to buy a used laptop. She took online classes, learning design, communication, and business basics. At the diner, she worked fewer shifts but more efficiently. Mrs. Jenkins encouraged her every step of the way. One night, as they cleaned together, Mrs. Jenkins said, Grace, I hope you know you're going to do something big one day. Grace smiled. I hope so. Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. No, don't hope. No. Those words sank deep into her heart. Her confidence began to grow, not from pride, but from gratitude. She realized she didn't need everything figured out. She just needed to keep moving forward. Pain had been her teacher, and now, finally, she was learning the lesson. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control what you do with it. One evening, she looked at her old pain list, all the things that had once broken her: her father leaving, her mother's illness, the poverty, the loneliness. She took a deep breath and wrote next to each one. Dad left me, I learned independence. Mom got sick, I learned compassion. We had nothing, I learned gratitude. I failed, I learned persistence. By the time she finished, she was crying, not out of sadness, but pride. She whispered, "Thank you, life. You were hard on me, but you made me strong." Chapter 4. The Transformation. Spring had arrived, carrying a lightness in the air that seemed to sweep away the heaviness of winter. Grace felt a shift in her chest, as if the immense weight she had carried for years had finally moved. The pain of her past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer controlled her. It had become fuel, pushing her forward. The first real step toward her transformation was simple. She bought a second-hand laptop with her scholarship money. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. Every evening, after work, she sat in front of the screen and learned design software online. Slowly, the shapes and colors she created began to look like real art, her messy sketches from before turning into something tangible and meaningful. Her first project was simple, a poster for a local cafe. She remembered the pride she felt when she gave her first design to Mrs. Jenkins. This time, she wanted to create something that would make people stop, look, and feel. Hours passed as she experimented with colors, fonts, and layouts. She made mistakes. Many mistakes. Some nights, she would close her laptop and stare at the ceiling, exhausted, wondering if she had taken on too much. Then she remembered the message from a stranger months ago: "You are stronger than you think." And she would pick the laptop back up and keep going. The day she finally sent the poster to the cafe owner, her hands trembled. She had never been so proud of something, not a test grade, not a paycheck, not even surviving another week. When the cafe owner replied with excitement, praising her work, Grace laughed out loud. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just learning, she was creating, and her creations mattered. Her confidence grew with small daily victories. She began applying for freelance design jobs online, even though fear tightened her chest with every click on submit. Rejections came, and some days were hard. She cried sometimes, missing the quiet of old habits when she could disappear into sadness. But each rejection became a lesson, and every small success, a client liking her work, a compliment on social media, became a spark she held onto. She attended workshops, webinars, and online courses. Every day she learned something new: typography, color theory, communication with clients. She began thinking like a professional, not just a self-taught teenager. Transformation wasn't magic. Life still threw challenges at her. Her mother's health sometimes declined, requiring hospital visits. Rent was still tight. Grace worked long hours at the diner to make everything work. Some nights, she fell asleep at her laptop, designs scattered around her. One night, sitting in the kitchen, she whispered, "I can't do everything." Her mother, smiling weakly, took her hand. "You can, Grace. You've already done so much. Just remember who you are." Grace squeezed her mother's hand. "I don't want to fail." "You won't," her mother said firmly. "You're stronger than you think." "You always have been." Her first major breakthrough came when she saw an online contest for young designers. The prize was a $2,000 internship at a well-known design studio in the city. She hesitated. The application required a professional-level portfolio. Her work was good for someone self-taught, but professional? Still, she decided to try. She spent days preparing her best designs, polishing each piece, rewriting her cover letter several times. Then she clicked submit and waited. Weeks later, an email arrived. Hands shaking, she opened it. "Congratulations, Grace. You have been selected for the internship." She dropped to her knees, clutching her laptop, tears streaming down her face. I did it," she whispered. Her mother rushed in. "Grace, what is it?" I got the internship. "I'm going to make it," she cried. Her mother hugged her tightly. I knew you would. That night, lying in bed, the girl who had once thought she would never succeed finally tasted victory, and it was sweeter than she had ever imagined. The internship was intense. She worked long hours, sometimes until midnight, learning from professional designers. They challenged her ideas, questioned her work, and pushed her to think differently. At first, it was intimidating. Grace often thought, I'm not good enough. I don't belong here. But she remembered her mantra, turn your pain into power. Each critique became an opportunity, each late night sharpened her skills. By the end of the first month, she had contributed to 3 major projects, and her supervisors noticed her talent and persistence. One evening, her supervisor said, Grace, you have an incredible eye for detail. And your persistence is remarkable. Keep this up and you'll go far. Grace smiled, feeling pride she had never known. This was what hard work looked like. This was transformation. During the internship, Grace realized something else. Her journey could inspire others. She began volunteering online, helping teenagers struggling with confidence, poverty, or family problems. Thank you, Grace, one teen wrote. I never thought I could get out of my situation. You showed me I could. Grace's heart swelled. She understood now that all her sleepless nights and moments of doubt had purpose. They had prepared her to help someone else. Her mother noticed too. You're not just surviving anymore, she said. You're thriving and helping others along the way. Grace nodded. I finally understand. The pain, it was preparing me. By the time Grace finished her internship, she had secured her first freelance clients, enough to pay her mother's bills comfortably and save a little. She moved into a small studio apartment of her own, filled with plants, books, and her artwork. Her designs were being published online, shared across social media. Most importantly, she felt proud of herself, not because she was rich or famous, but because she had transformed her life. She wrote in her journal one night, I am no longer the girl who cried herself to sleep. I am no longer the girl who felt powerless. I am Grace Miller, resilient, creative, and unstoppable. I turn my pain into power, and I will never let it control me again. She knew life would still have challenges. There would be setbacks, heartbreaks, and moments of doubt. But now she had learned the most important lesson. Pain is inevitable. Growth is optional. And I choose growth. The girl who once stared at the ceiling, wishing for escape, now looked at the world with determination. She had survived, she had learned, and she was ready to create, inspire, and live fully. Chapter 5. Triumph and Success. The sun rose gently over the city, casting a golden glow on the streets below. Grace stood by the window of her small studio apartment, coffee in hand, and watched the world wake up. The girl who had once cried herself to sleep now looked at life with a quiet confidence that felt new and exhilarating. She had survived the storms of her past, learned from her pain, and now she was ready to embrace success, not just as a dream, but as her reality. Her days were full but fulfilling. Freelance projects kept her busy, and each completed assignment reminded her of how far she had come. She no longer worked late at the diner. Instead, she invested her time in building her portfolio, networking with clients, and developing her skills. The work was challenging, but Grace had learned that the greatest growth often came from the hardest moments. One morning, she received an email that made her heart skip a beat. A prestigious design agency in the city had seen her online portfolio and wanted to offer her a permanent position. Grace's hands trembled as she read the words. She sat down, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions inside her: disbelief, excitement, gratitude. For years, she had imagined moments like this, but never dared to believe they could come true. She remembered the nights of doubt, the tears, the loneliness, and the fear that she would never succeed. Now, here it was, a concrete reward for her persistence, talent, and resilience. Her mother, who had always been her anchor, smiled proudly when Grace shared the news. You did it, she said simply. I always knew you would. Grace hugged her tightly. I couldn't have done it without you. Your belief in me kept me going. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Grace organized her portfolio, polished her designs, and rehearsed how she would present herself to the agency. When the interview day arrived, she walked into the building with her heart pounding, but her head held high. She greeted the team with a calm confidence she had never felt before, her hands steady and her voice clear. During the interview, the lead designer, a kind but serious woman named Sophia, asked Grace, "What makes your designs unique?" Grace took a deep breath and thought about her journey. "I think my designs tell stories. Every piece I create reflects experiences, my own, and those I've learned from others. I've faced challenges, and I channel that into my work. I believe that makes it more human, more relatable." Sophia smiled, impressed. "That's exactly what we're looking for. You understand the power of design beyond aesthetics. You understand its soul." By the end of the interview, Grace felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond getting the job. She had shared her journey, her struggles, and her growth, and it had been recognized. A few days later, the email arrived. "Welcome to the team, Grace. We're excited to have you." She cried tears of joy, finally feeling that the hardest years of her life had a purpose. She had transformed pain into power, doubt into courage, and fear into achievement. Life did not slow down. The agency's projects were demanding, but Grace thrived under the pressure. Her ideas were valued, her designs praised, and slowly, she began to see herself not just as a survivor, but as a creator, a leader, and an inspiration. Her work brought her into contact with people from all walks of life, each with their own stories, struggles, and dreams. Grace shared her journey openly when appropriate, and people were inspired by her honesty and resilience. She realized that her past struggles had given her empathy and perspective that few others possessed. Pain had not weakened her, it had strengthened her, sharpened her vision, and deepened her understanding of human emotion. One evening, after a long day at the agency, she walked home under the city lights, thinking about how far she had come. She paused near a small park and watched children laughing as they played. She thought about herself years ago, crying in her bedroom, feeling powerless and lost. And now she had the power to create, to inspire, to build a life she could be proud of. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Jenna, her old coworker from the diner. "I had to see you," Jenna said. "You've done amazing things, Grace." "I always knew you would." Grace smiled warmly. "It hasn't been easy, but every step, every struggle led me here." Jenna nodded, looking around at Grace's cozy apartment filled with books, art supplies, and framed designs. "You're living your dream." "I'm living my purpose," Grace corrected gently. She realized that success was not just about recognition or money, it was about finding her place in the world, feeling fulfilled, and using her experiences to help others. Months passed, and Grace's reputation as a talented designer grew. She took on bigger projects, mentored young artists online, and even started giving talks about resilience and creativity. People admired her not just for her work, but for the journey she had taken to get there. One rainy afternoon, she received a letter from a young girl who had been inspired by Grace's story. "I read about you online," the letter said. "I've been struggling with so much, and your journey gives me hope. Thank you for showing me that I can overcome my fears too." Grace held the letter close to her heart. For a moment, she felt the weight of all the pain she had carried, the loneliness, and the despair of years ago. And then she smiled, understanding fully that every tear, every fear, every sleepless night had led to this, a life where her struggles could help others. That night, she wrote in her journal, "I am Grace Miller. I have survived, I have learned, and I have risen. My pain is my power. My struggle is my strength. My life is my purpose. And I will continue to grow, inspire, and create every day." As she closed her journal and looked out at the city skyline, Grace felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The journey had been long and difficult, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and unstoppable. She understood now that triumph was not a single moment, it was the culmination of every choice, every effort, and every act of courage along the way. Grace had turned her pain into power. She had transformed despair into hope and doubt into achievement. She had not only succeeded, she had become a beacon for anyone who had ever felt lost, alone, or powerless. And as the stars appeared in the night sky, she whispered softly to herself, "This is only the beginning." She had conquered her past, embraced her present, and was ready to build a future filled with endless possibilities. The girl who once cried herself to sleep had become a woman who inspired others to rise. Grace Miller had triumphed. Thank you for listening to this inspiring story. If Grace's journey touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Smooth English for more motivational stories, and share it with someone who might need a little encouragement today. Remember, no matter the challenges, you can turn your pain into power.